Okay, so let's do this again. Hello, everybody, and welcome to May's Drupal for Gov webinar. Our topic is content sync across environments, and our presenter is Darcy Barton from Palladian Partners. Now, before I introduce her, I kind of want to go over some Drupal for Gov related items. Most of you all know who we are. Thank you again for attending. We are a community of open source advocates, and we love all things open source. So in addition to this monthly webinar that's held every third Thursday at 3 p.m., we also have our yearly conference. And so I'm pleased to announce that we will be holding our conference in November. So save the date, November 1st and 2nd. More details will be coming out soon. So if you are a member of our email list, then you will receive communication about it. We also do Drupal. We also do the global training days. And we actually had a successful one last month where this content sync presentation was held, and it was so popular that we decided to bring it to the webinar. We also do the Gov Summits at the DrupalCon North America. And if you're interested in speaking, if you have space or even are interested in sponsoring a global training day or a half-day event, please reach out to us. We are available on Slack and Twitter. And as I mentioned, the same. So if you're interested in hosting, we're looking for space. We've been able to find a space for 2023 to hold a Drupal for Gov conference, but we're always looking for space for half-day events. So please reach out if you can host. If you miss a webinar, we have, after each webinar, we upload them to YouTube. So go there and check it out. And also we update them on the Drupal for Gov webinars page. And last but definitely not least, I'd like to introduce Darcy Barton of Palladian Partners. She is a software engineering team lead and a certified Drupal software engineer specializing in federal and accessible websites.
So thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen here.
So let me stop. So if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat. And we will moderate them and have them answered. So welcome, Darcy.
Hello, can you see my screen and can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes and yes.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Glad we are all here today on this wonderful Thursday to talk about Drupal. So today we're talking about content syncing across environments. And before we dive in, I just wanted to say that this is helpful for anyone who is trying to push content between environments and remove an engineer from the day-to-day process of that. So just to reiterate, I'm Darcy Barton. I'm the software engineering team lead. And I would like to mention my colleagues, Danny Loch and Jane Wong. Without their help, this plugin, this add-on would not be available. So kudos to them and thank to them for their hard work on this as well. And together we have over 20 years of Drupal development experience, specializing in theming and custom modules. And so we work at Palladian Partners, and we are a company that translates evidence-based research into communication for the everyday person. And I'm not going to reiterate all of this word by word, but the highlight at the bottom is web content and multimedia strategy. And we focus on federal and nonprofit agencies. So to get a little bit more specific about the use case that we are talking about today, because I know that there are a lot of different types of content processes that everyone uses, and a lot of different types of Drupal setups and installs. So what we're talking about today is a setup where you are trying to push content between perhaps a staging environment and a production environment, both of which house Drupal 9. And you just, where they're basically copies of each other, but you don't want them to be super mirrors of each other, right? So when we talked about this, we did have a lot of questions at our in-person presentation. So I just kind of wanted to get a little bit more picture around that. So when we have our server setups here, we have a development server, and that one is where the developers live, where we are safe to sort of break things and test things out. The clients don't go here. They do have access. They can see it, but they generally don't visit here. And content editors don't live in here. It's where the first round of functionality testing is done. And then we move on to the staging environment. And this is where all of our content updates are done. Our content editors live in here. And this is also where we send the links for our internal client reviews, the external client reviews, SMEs, things of that nature. And then our functionality with our real content. And then we have our production server, and that one is for emergency content updates only. But it's pretty locked down and no one can get in really unless it's an emergency setup. So I'm hoping that kind of helps paint a clearer picture in sort of our process and what we needed for content. So if you're here today, my assumption will be you may know about the deploy module. In Drupal 7, it was really great where you could essentially pick individual pieces or individual nodes and publish them across environments. It allowed you to sort of have content set, stay there for a few days, a few weeks if you needed to, select it, and then carry it over. It worked really great. The only hiccup that maybe happened was dependencies kind of got hung up at times because it may have published one page a little bit too soon and then had a dependency hang up. But overall, it worked great. And then when Drupal 8 came out with the YAML file changes and all of that structure change, Deploy introduced workspace and multi-version and those types of dependencies. And it worked really well. We really liked how it was set up. But then after 8.4, we had a lot of conflicts and we weren't able to deploy the content in the way that we needed. So we had to take a step back and kind of see what were people in the community doing and see if maybe there was a solution out there for us. And so I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about the different solutions that we walked down. As I go through these, I do want to say a lot of these are really fantastic solutions depending on what you need, but none of these is really checked the box that we were looking for. So the first one that we looked at was CMS Content Sync. And this was really great. It worked exactly the way we wanted it to. It allows for publishing individual pages, individual files, things like that. The only, I would say, cons in our eyes were that it was a third-party environment, which of course can introduce a security concern, especially if you're working with federal government information. And it also had a service charge. So it had sort of like a window of certain amount of publishes you could do within a time frame, and they were dependent on the amount of entities. So it got a little complex for us. The next one we looked at was Acquia Content Hub. Another great solution, but this one created more of a one-to-one solution, sort of like Workspaces did. And so it didn't really allow us to have these different setups and these different builds on these different environments that we were looking for. The next solution, which is pretty standard, which is writing directly on the production server. I don't know about you all, but this one stresses me out quite a bit of writing on production server, mostly because I am prone to typos myself. And so when you introduce the person onto the environment, you are prone to having more errors and hiccups. So if you take the person out of the production environment, that's more ideal. You also have that security concern, right? Because you have to open up that access to allow users in to write that content in that environment. And then the final option is just doing a database copy of staging over to production. This works really great, especially if you have larger pieces of content that you're trying to carry over. But it's really not great for day-to-day, especially because if you want to do one page and have one sitting, you can't really do that with a database carryover. It also requires an engineer to go in and do that carryover for you. And it could also be an introduction of a security concern based on log data and things like that. So these were the options we looked at, and none of them were really kind of hitting that 100% mark that we were looking for. But there was this one other module we were looking at during our sleuthing, and that one is called content synchronization. So this one is currently out on in the community right now on Drupal.org. And what this module does is it allows you to select a bunch of content and export it all as YAML files, which if you're not familiar with in Drupal 8, when it came out, everything is YAML files, which is fantastic. It makes it so much easier to sort of carry that information on between servers. So we saw this and we said, this really has a lot of what we already need. We just kind of need to find a way to lift it up and carry it over. So that's essentially what we did in the work that we did with our patch. So we took content synchronization and we found a way to take all those compiled YAML files and carry them between servers using SSH. It has timed deployments, which I'll get into in a bit, which are dependent on cron runs inside Drupal. So the requirements to install this on your environments is that you need to have SSH access along with like a user account to communicate between those environments that you're trying to publish between. And just as a note, things that we are currently working on are files themselves. It'll carry over the YAML information, but not the actual like image file or PDF. That's something we're still kind of working on, along with Path Auto. And for Path Auto, obviously, if you have it installed on your production server and it's sort of like a rule, it'll implement the rule just fine. It's just more when you put in those more specific one-off URLs on those pages, that's not getting carried over. So I'm sure you're all wondering, how do you set it up on your site? How does it work? And all those fun questions. To set it up, it's a pretty straightforward. What you need to do is you need to set up an API key folder. You do have an option to use a username and password with the SSH, so the API key folder is not a requirement. But as you see here, it's up here in this location. Don't recommend naming it that. This is just for demonstration purposes only. But you'll have your API key folder here. And then you also have to add a deploy folder. And this is what will house the information that's getting captured or pushed between the environments. So once you set up these folders and set them up with the correct permissions, you need to enable the module, set up the environment variables within the Drupal module, set up the permissions for the users, and then you should be good to go. So here is a screen of the environment variables. Trying to zoom in a bit more. On the left side is just a longer screenshot where it shows the dev environment, stage environment, and production environment, which mimics the screen you saw earlier. At the very top, it says the auto deploy directory for the current site, and that's where you'd point to that folder of the deploy folder. And then for each environment, it's broken down like the one on to the right over here, where you'll put your environment URL. You put in the SSH username and the host. And this drop-down option, as I mentioned before, it'll be either key or password. If it's key, you'll see here, there are the key paths to get to those keys. If it's password, you'll have a password field that shows up. And then the port, and then the auto deploy directory path for that environment there. So it's pretty straightforward in terms of the fields that you provide. And then once you set that up, you're pretty good to go. On here, these are the permission levels. Just wanted to show that you can set them up based on environment. So if you have a content editor coming in and you only want them to deploy to maybe the dev environment with their content changes, you can lock that down that way. So since Murphy's Law is truly Murphy's Law, we have a video here of running deploy. So just wanted to show you the screen here and break this down a little bit. So this is our deploy screen, and it looks a lot like the content editing field or content editing screen that you have with the change of this action section right here. So in this action section, you can choose your target environment. And since we recorded this on the staging environment, it's only showing dev and prod as the options to deploy. And then you can choose if you want to deploy your node as published or unpublished. And the reason for this is sometimes we'll have content that we'll want to be live on stage for the client to still see. But maybe it's not supposed to go live until Tuesday at 6 a.m. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be up at 5:53 pushing the content over. So you can push that content unpublished with that file having those auto-publish rules that Drupal has. So it'll carry over unpublished. And then if you have those rules set up on the prod server, it can then push it live at 6 a.m. on that Tuesday morning. And then down here, you have deployment time. So the deployment time isn't really to the node. And by that, I mean, it is dependent on cron. What happens is you will select your date and time in these dropdowns. And every time cron runs, it is going to check that deployment time and confirm if that time has passed. If the time has not passed, it is going to stay in that deployment queue until it has. So depending on how often your cron runs may depend on how reliable this deployment time is. But you have cron running once every few hours, it might not be so dependable. But that's an option there. So once you choose those settings, you choose your content and you hit deploy, and then we'll watch the screen and then we'll walk it through a bit more. So then when they hit deploy, you'll get a status message that says the selected nodes have been added to the list of auto deployment. And then what you'll see is we'll go to check the deploy logs. And this is a page that lists all the deployments that have happened and the times that they've happened. And you'll see that we have the testing page, it says not deployed. And then to get it deployed, we just have to run cron. And it'll say that cron ran successfully. And then when we double check the deploy logs, it'll say deployed at the bottom. And then the next way to verify that would be then to go and check your production environment and see if it was carried over. There are a few hangups though on this, I will note, depending on the setup that you have. If you have different levels of caching, there might be some setup you have to do on that end to make sure it clears it in time. But that's also something we're looking into because we do post on some Aqua environments. We have a few levels of cache that we kind of need to clear through. But that is something that we are looking into. So I'm sure you watched this and you're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. We have the patch up on the community right now. We just uploaded it last night, hot off the presses. So it's available for you to take a look at, provide feedback, and let us know what you think. Outside of that, does anyone have any questions? I do want to say that if you have any questions outside of this, something comes up, feel free to reach out to us at webdev@palladianpartners.com. because we do love talking about Drupal and help problem solving. So feel free to reach out anytime.
Does any having issues? Does anybody have any questions? Let me.
So
I have a question.
Sure.
How do you work with workflow, or I guess how does this workflow work in where on one environment you have, say, a new field, whether that it could be a text field, it could be an entity reference field, etc. Is it just a matter of you as the developer have to know that you have to deploy new code so that the configuration for that new field exists before you do the content sync?
Yeah, great question. Right now, yes. So if we created a new entity that is like an entity reference on one of the content types, we'll have to make sure that that exists on the other environment before we deploy that over. But that is something that we're looking into, of it sort of trying to grab those templates and pull it over too.
Gotcha.
Okay, so I'm going to also read from the comments. So the first question that I see from Agnes is, do you consider entity share?
No, I'm not sure what that is. We'll have to check into that.
Okay. Another question, someone asked about the PowerPoint presentation. If Darcy shares that, I can post it on the Drupal for Gov and that'll be available. But the next question is, we are hosting on Acquia, but our vendor doesn't allow us to use SSH.
I would check in with them because we're hosted on Acquia. And so we were able to set this up. We're happy to help kind of debug that too, if you'd like. I'd definitely ask them.
And another question from Joel is, how do you handle referenced entities?
Yes, that is probably my favorite part about this, is that it grabs the YAML file and checks the IDs of all the entities that it's referencing, and it goes and grabs those as well. So if you have a content type that has 5 or 7 referenced entities on there, it'll carry all of those over, just not the actual files themselves, as those are still in progress. Files as in images and PDFs.
Okay, another question from Eric is, does the module work with an updated entity?
Yeah, so that one is where we would have to make sure those updates are on both environments at the moment.
Okay, so Agnes asks, does this work with content moderation?
We have not tried to add that into our process yet, so I cannot speak to it at the moment.
And we have another question from Darren. Curious what your patch consists of that content sync wasn't doing already. The project page on Drupal.org talks about syncing between environments, but your patch appears to do more.
Yeah, so it allows, by default, it allows for the copying and pasting and carrying between environments. So it allows a user to sign in and then paste the YAML from it. But this one is what it's doing, is it's carrying it with the SSH to remove the human.
Okay, and then Scott is asking the question, does the content sync work with Drupal 10?
We are not there yet, Scott, but we hope to report back soon.
And Darren has another question. How are you currently handling files and image syncs? Manage those manually after the sync?
Yes, so right now, since most of our sites are on Acquia, Acquia does have a curl command that we're able to use to push files between environments. So we're currently manually doing that at the moment to keep up with the deploys. So it's not ideal, but hopefully we'll fix it soon.
And then another question is, it moved let me see. So the file references move, but the files don't?
Yes. Yeah. So right now it's a timing situation too, because if we carry over the files too soon, Drupal will say, no, the file already exists, and then try to add that 0, 1 at the end. So we have to time it properly to carry the information over and then the images.
Okay, and I think that those are all of the questions. Does anyone else have any questions?
So it does create, like if I had a node with a media reference, it would create the media item, but it just wouldn't have a file associated with it.
Yeah, it
Got it.
has to carry over the YAML file, but there's no actual file with it. So Drupal doesn't know what to do with it at the moment.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, I'd like to thank Darcy again for being our main presenter.
Thank you for having me. It was very exciting to share.
All
And
right.
thank you all for the great questions.
Yes, someone asked, they were 15 minutes late. It'll be available on YouTube, so you can review it again. All right, thank you, everybody, and see you next month.
Thank you.